Yes, ma'am. Dear participants and Jayantians, I would like to bring to your notice a few general instructions. Keep your microphone mute when you're not speaking. Also, enable the videos if only required. Don't get distracted by mobile phones. Be active and make the session interactive. And finally, students, please maintain the Jayantian decorum. I quote, always bear in mind that your own resolution to succeed is more important than any other. Abraham Lincoln. A very warm good afternoon to one and all present here. The most esteemed resource person of the day, Dr. Lekha S. Chakraborty, Professor at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Dr. K. Vinoda Devi, Head of the Department of Economics, all the faculty members, participants of the webinar, and dear Jayantians. Here we are again for the third expert lecture on the implications of the new Union Budget 2022, organized by the Department of Economics, Kristu Jayanti College, as part of the Budget Week celebration. Today, we have come together on this virtual platform to attain a better outlook on the macroeconomic framework of the Union Budget. Faith and prayer are the vitamins of the soul. Man cannot live in health without them. I invite the department choir for the invocation.
What can I give? What can I bring that would be pleasing to my King? I give my heart, not just a part. I'm lifting up my everything, but it's all I have to offer, and it's all I have to give. Two hands and one heart, one life to offer you. Two hands and one heart, that's what I give to you. Use me today, I know you can. Lord, I surrender to your plan. You make this heart, you make these hands. Take me and use me as I am. But it's all I have to offer, and it's all I have to give. Two hands and one heart, one life to offer you. Two hands and one heart, that's what I give to you. Two hands and one heart, one life to offer you. Two hands and one heart, that's what I give to you. That's what I give to you.
Thank you, choir. Today, I'm extremely delighted to offer a hospitable welcome to this auspicious gathering. We have an esteemed resource person amidst us, Dr. Lekha S. Chakraborty, Professor at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Ma'am is here with us today to deliver an expert talk on the macroeconomic framework of the Union Budget. Thank you, ma'am, for spending your valuable time with us. It's indeed my privilege to welcome you on the behalf of the Department of Economics, Kristu Jayanti College. I also take this opportunity to welcome Dr. K. Vinoda Devi, Head of the Department of Economics. She's a guiding light to knowledge and success. It's my privilege and honor to welcome you, ma'am. I also extend a cheerful welcome to the faculty members of the Department of Economics, the participants of today's webinar, and all the Jayantians. Once again, I welcome you all. Now, it's time to present before this August gathering our chief guest of the day. I call upon Ms. Dia Susan John of second year BA to introduce the chief guest. Over to you, Ms. Dia.
Dr. Lega S. Chakraborty is a professor at NIPFP and an elected member of the Governing Board of Management in the National Institute of Public Finance, Munich, the World Association of Public Finance Economists. She is a pioneer economist in institutionalizing gender budgeting in India, with Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India in 2004. She is also affiliated at the Levy Economic Institute of Bard College, New York. Ma'am's areas of interest are macroeconomics of public finance, fiscal federalism, extractive sector economics, financing human development, and gender budgeting. Ma'am is the recipient of IFU's PhD thesis award from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Ma'am is the author of Fiscal Consolidation, Budget Deficits, and Macroeconomy. Ma'am has worked for the IMF, World Bank, the UNESCAP, the UNDP, the UN Women, and the Commonwealth Secretariat on short stints. OD of Shastri Indo-Canada program from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Government of Canada. Ma'am was a visiting professor at American University, Uppsala University, Carleton University, and University of Utah, USA. She has papers in international and national journals. Ma'am is also a columnist in the Indian Express. It's indeed an honor for us to have such a prominent and reputed individual like you, ma'am. I once again welcome you to this webinar and invite to lead with a talk. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yeah. There is some technical issues, so I will be talking without cam, but hope you will excuse me for that. And thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dr. Vinoda Devi, to talk to me about this, budget celebrations in your department. And you invited me to talk to the students. And talking to students is always a pleasure, and I'm also a learner. So we can learn together, and I will make it more interactive. And I confine my talk to maybe 25-30 minutes. Then we can open the floor and I can listen to your questions and we can have a very interactive session. That's what I'm looking forward to. Now, coming to the topic, union budget, you must be thinking that finance minister is like a magician who pulls out rabbits from her hat. And what were those rabbits, which came out in this budget? You must be thinking like that. But to me, a finance minister is no longer a magician in the context of India. Those kind of surprise factors which we look into a budget, the budget is such an event. Those things were there when I was a child. But now, more or less, budget is not that a great event. I'm not telling that it's a non-event, but it sets the the pace of macroeconomic framework in India. So that's why, when Dr. Vinoda Devi ma'am and I was talking about how we can fine tune the topic of conversation today, we thought that we will call it as the macro framework of the budget. So that's why, we titled it like that. And when we talk about the macro framework, the first thing that is coming to my mind is about, fiscal consolidation. When we talk about the budget, the first thing we look into, what is a deficit number? What is a fiscal deficit number? And fiscal deficit by definition is your net borrowing requirement. How much you're going to borrow. What is that number as a percentage of GDP? Is it so high? If it is very high, how will investors rate us? What is the investors' confidence or that animal spirits? We are going to trigger from the budget. So I looked at the number. We pegged the fiscal deficit to GDP number this year. And when I look at the revised estimates and actuals, these are very important, numbers you need to look into. Like the year of budget, or when we announce the budget, what's come out is budget estimates. After 1 year, there will be revised estimates. Like what is the projections and what is a revised projection. So is there any error? If there is any error, or if there is any deviation, we call it as, fiscal marksmanship is not perfect. Then after 1 year, then again, we look into actual estimate. It's not actual estimates. From the estimates, the actual spending or actual tax or actual revenue. So in this journey, the marksmanship of finance ministry, we look into. If the marksmanship is not perfect, then we say that this budget is not credible. They give a fiscal forecasting. But why there are so many errors when we get the RE and BE? So the fiscal forecasting errors, that's becoming one of the important areas of concern. So that's why when I mentioned about the BE fiscal deficit to GDP, it was 6.8. That was our pegged fiscal deficit for this year. And when we looked into the revised estimates, a slight fiscal slippage is there. Like it is 6.9% of GDP. Now, what is the estimate for the next year? We're anticipating the budget estimate for the next year is 6.4. And are you comfortable with the number that our fiscal deficit to GDP is 6.4? You know why I'm asking this question? In India, we have fiscal rules. Responsibility and management. Maintain the fiscal deficit at 3% of GDP. But look at the numbers. But in the last budget, what happened is you will get blown away with that number. Like 9.2% of GDP was last year's RE, revised estimates. Why it has happened? How finance minister defended that number of 9.2 or 9.5% of GDP your deficit last year? What was the narrative? She told, my deficit may be high, but don't fear deficit in the time of pandemic or in the time of crisis, because we can substantiate that high deficit number by linking it to increased public investment. Or we try to reduce the output gap of our country. Output gap in the sense, you have a potential GDP and an actual GDP. It's like, your potential you want to reach, right? And what is the actual thing you reached? So there is a gap. So potential GDP, you calculate it through many econometric techniques and all that your teachers will, teach you when you start learning about the econometric models. And, we use a certain kind of filter, like we take the GDP series, and GDP means that's a combination of many cyclicality elements and a trend element, a trend in which GDP grows, and the GDP can also fluctuate. So the potential is you remove those fluctuations and that call that trend as your potential. So that's the way you calculate the potential. So if you can argue that this deficit is used for financing your increased capital spending, which will help you in the growth recovery process, or you are trying to reduce the output gap in the sectors, whichever sector is it, you can name it. There will be a potential, output there and the actual output. So you need to reduce that gap. That means you're reaching towards the potential. For that, if you're using your budget deficit, how that is interpreted, deficit Means on one side you have taxes and revenue, on other side you have expenses. And how you reach this fiscal consolidation, that 3% of GDP, either you have to increase the taxes should be buoyant, or the expenditure compression has to happen. So if the path of your fiscal consolidation, that means arriving at a particular deficit number, is through expenditure compression, that will create problems in the economy. So you need to look into this budget where there is any expenditure compression. So these are the ways in which you can look into the budget and read the numbers. So first look at the deficit. Now you are asking what determines this deficit, whether it is happening on the revenue side or the taxation side. Is there any revenue uncertainties? That fiscal marksmanship, budget credibility, what we estimated and what we got, is there any deviation? So these are the questions you need to look into when you read the budget numbers. So we can open the budget document right now. I don't have that link, but ma'am will give you that link. There is a document called Budget at a Glance. There are some 5-6 tables over there. If you are happy, if you're able to understand that tables, satisfactorily, that is the first step to understand a budget. And in this Budget at a Glance document, you need to look into this taxation side. And the number shows that taxes are very buoyant this time. Our budget estimates and the revised estimates, if we look into the fiscal forecasting errors on the taxation side, that's quite, minimalized this time. So you're very happy that your taxes are buoyant. But on the other side, when you look into the expenditure side, the size of the government, when compared to the last normal year was 2019, size of the government has gone up a bit. What is size of government? How do you measure size of government? That is your expenditure to GDP ratio. So the size of the government has gone up. Now you have to ask a question. Within expenditure, you have two components, revenue. You have doing some work, or you gave a what do you call a script to All India Radio, and they contract, through the contract you got some money. These are the ways in which students get some money, that you will be participating in broadcasting or telecasting in your state, or these are the ways in which, when I was a child, I used to get some money. Then suddenly you're thinking that you need to buy something. It's a capital for you. You need to buy a laptop, that we need parents help. So maybe what something you will need to invest. That means that stays with you for a long time. That is your capital spending. But revenue spending means, it's a kind of a recurring expenditure. That is like ice cream, or you go out for a dinner, or you just have fun or something, because that doesn't stay. When you spend, that's over. So that's kind of thing is your revenue spending, and it's also maybe one recurring in nature. Now comes the question, how do you defend your deficit? Because if you want to buy that capital for you, you ask your friend, can you lend me some money? I need some borrowing. I need to get some money, but I can pay you back, later. That kind of a deficit is okay, because you're paying for your capital spending. But if you are borrowing for your recurrent spending and the spending which doesn't create any capital nature, there are two, sides to it. That can we borrow to finance revenue spending, because it's not creating any capital. So this is the dilemma of a government. And right now, when I look into these numbers, when I saw that revenue spending is curtailed, capital spending is more, then, in the times of pandemic, in the times of crisis, I thought that in general, we think that revenue spending is bad because it's not any creating any capital. But in the times of pandemic, revenue spending is bad. That assumption, we need to, keep that aside, because most of the revenue spending of the government is in education, in health, water and sanitation, social infrastructure. That's basically your health and education, then employment generation. So you need to have a rethinking about revenue spending in times of crisis. So to me, revenue spending in times of crisis by the government is a little okay, because otherwise we need to curtail the spending related to employment, education, health. So that should not happen. But in the budget, there is a reduction in the revenue spending in Entrica, that is the job guarantee scheme, then in the health mission. So this is primarily a health crisis. And in order to prevent this health crisis mounting into macroeconomic crisis, what we have to do, we have to arrest the health crisis. We have to spend more on health sector. It is not ad hoc increase in the health spending, but a kind of investment in the health spending. So if you look at the numbers, public expenditure in the health sector to GDP, that is less than 1% at the union government level. And last year, there was a huge announcement, if you remember, that we increased that to 0.8%, but still, it is below 1% of GDP. So what I was thinking that, okay, this budget will focus on public investment in health, not in an ad hoc and arbitrary manner, but from a long-term perspective, there will be an increase in the public investment in health. Now, let's look into the narrative of the government. They have increased the spending in capital infrastructure. And to me, that's very important decision, because you must have heard about crowding in and crowding out. That means public investment can crowd in private investment. What is the most important determinant of the private investment? It is public investment. So high deficit, that's fine if it can be substantiated by telling the narrative that you're using it to finance your capital infrastructure. And that exactly has happened in this budget. And if you're interested in numbers, then I will look into that numbers and I will tell you that how much it has increased the capex. The capex is budgeted to be 7.5 lakh crore. 7.5 lakh crore means 7.5 trillion. And this is higher by, which was, it is higher by 2 lakh crore, 2 trillion more. And when you compare with the 2019, the last normal year, that time it was only $3.36 trillion. So trillion rupees. So you can understand that there is an increase in the capital spending in the budget, but still, if you look at meticulously, the decisions for the capital spending is happening more at the state level. States are doing the heavy lifting in terms of capital spending than at the center government level. So how center government is helping the states to go ahead with their capital spending process? If you look at the budgetary announcements, you can see that some, 1 lakh crore is devolved down to the states as loans for their capital projects. So that's the way, the government is giving money down to the states. And also the states, when I say that the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio should be strictly 3, that's our fiscal rule. Now we made it flexible because it is the crisis time. We look into the flexibility of that fiscal deficit GDP ratio at the state level as well. For the states, it is little flexible now. It is not strictly 3%. They can go up to 4% of GDP, their deficit, but conditionality is there. Up to 3.5, that's fine. But another 0.5 increase in that borrowing space will happen only if the states will undertake power sector reforms. You're getting the point, right? We have generated sufficient electricity in our country, but there are distribution issues, so that there is no 100% electrification of our villages, and there are a lot of problems regarding distribution. And the distribution companies, power companies, are loss-making companies. So we need to help the discoms, distribution companies. So how can we do that? How can we do the power sector reforms? So this thought process is there, and this government is supporting the power sector reforms through this technique of conditionality applied to the state's extra borrowing powers. And in the power ministry, there is a dashboard where you can get the data. Take a look into the financial parameters across states of India for the power sector distribution companies. And there is a concept called aggregate technical and distribution, that loss, that is like theft can happen. There is other technical loss also can happen. So you have to minimize that. That loss needs to be minimized. That is one financial parameter. And another parameter is your cost and your revenue should be minimized. Otherwise, it's a huge gap of deficit. So how the power sector companies are minimizing their aggregate cost and aggregate revenue gap, how they are doing tariff revisions. Then operational parameters means how they are doing the smart metering, how they are segregating, their consumer and the commercial purposes kind of power distribution. So these are the meticulous things you can look into the power sector to understand that why the power sector is linked to this budgetary, the borrowing space. And the philosophy, in the time of pandemic, you may be worrying that why we are looking into power sector. Because in the time of pandemic, government has to undertake instantaneous firefighting to control the pandemic, as well as they have to float long-term structural reforms. Otherwise, the downturn in your GDP, if you think that it will take an upturn the moment you correct the cyclicality issues, that may not happen. That may be happening due to the structural reasons or structural bottlenecks. So simultaneously, you need to deal with the instantaneous firefighting, and you also have to use the crisis as an opportunity to float the medium term and long term reforms. That's why it's very important. And there are fiscal risk, and you need to correct that. Now, looking at the taxation side or the revenue side, I mentioned taxes are buoyant, direct taxes, indirect taxes are buoyant. But when I come to the non-tax revenue sources, disinvestment, you must be remembering that there's a major, what do you call, program of the government to increase the fiscal space. And the moment you look into the disinvestment proceeds, your aspiration to get the privatization proceeds and the real numbers, there is a huge gap. That's what I mentioned earlier as the fiscal marksmanship. So if you're interested in the numbers, maybe I can give you those numbers about the fiscal marksmanship of that disinvestment proceeds. It's a major area of concern. Our target last year was 1.75 lakh crore. That means 1.75 trillion. And the amount we realized that time touched only 9,330 crore. You can understand where is 1.75 trillion and where is 9,330 crore. But this was not only the last year. If you look 2 years back, then you can see our target was 2.1 lakh crore or 2.1 trillion. And what we collected was just 32,000 crores. So that's why, there was a huge criticism about the targets government set for the privatization proceeds or the disinvestment proceeds. We thought that we will increase the fiscal space through going for a mega disinvestment or a privatization program. But you can understand that other than aviation sector, Air India, we could not sell anything. So there's a huge gap over there. And that's why this year's budget, if you look into, the disinvestment targets are very realistic. They are not talking about $1.75 trillion, crore, or 2.1 trillion rupees. So nothing like that. They have a very modest disinvestment target this year. And I don't know whether government is disinterested in their private taxation program or because, otherwise they looked into the privatization to enhance the fiscal space, because fiscal space is very important to deal with the pandemic, because you need to do expenditure programs. So that's why, if you are finance minister, what you would have done, how you enhance your space, fiscal space, disinvestment proceeds is not working. Then other thing is you look into financing of your deficit, right? If the taxes are also not buoyant, you don't have much taxes also, then you think about how we can do the deficit. Because in the time of pandemic, you cannot go for a COVID tax because people don't have any money. In addition to that, we cannot ask a COVID tax or a COVID cess from people. So that has not happened in the context of India. We have not worked out any COVID tax or COVID cess to increase the fiscal space. We were trying disinvestment and privatization proceeds, but that didn't work well. And we have fiscal space problem. And other part is fiscal financing of deficit. If you look into the major component of financing deficit in India is to market borrowings. So there was a talk by our chief economic advisor, former chief economic advisor Kaushik Basu, the Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee. They all spoke about go for monetization of deficit. What is monetization of deficit? In India, till late 80s, we have done that by asking RBI to give some money to finance the deficit. That is through ad hoc treasury bills. And in plain language, you call as print money and finance deficit. It is not exactly printing money and giving, but that mechanism happens through the ad hoc treasury bills. Ad hoc means 14-day treasury bills. That's a way, used to finance deficit long back. We stopped that process because it led to inflation, it led to fiscal profligacy. So we stopped that and we slowly moved away from monetization of deficit to bond financing of deficit. Bond financing is there is a loanable funds market, and in the pool of loanable funds, you preempt a part of that loanable funds to finance your deficit. Then the question came, if the loanable funds shrink, the funds available for the private sector will shrink. That means there will be a crowding out. No. If you are preempting these resources from the loanable funds pool to finance your deficit, and if you focus on, as I mentioned earlier, on the capital infrastructure spending, you are going to crowd in private investment because private investment needs public infrastructure investment. So studies meticulously found that, empirical studies based on data, econometric models, we found that public investment crowds in private investment in the context of emerging economies like India. So that's an important take. And so this hike in, that capex in this budget is welcome if it is crowding in private investment. So that is the way it is communicated. A high deficit number, don't fear deficit, that is communicated. Communication is a very important thing for a finance minister, because she has to signal that to give confidence to the investors, and also our capital should not be flighty, foreign capital. So this macroeconomic fundamentals she needs to articulate perfect. So she articulate, okay, maybe my deficit numbers are huge, but I'm doing it for capex. So that's the way she articulated it. Now, coming to the question of expenditure side. So the revenue side is more or less clear. Our revenue were buoyant in the sense the taxation revenues, and the GST revenue was also quite buoyant this time. But on the non-tax side, as I mentioned, disinvestment story has gone haywire. Privatization proceeds, we could not. Maybe privatization cannot be used as a quick fix for enhancing fiscal space or to get fiscal proceeds, because privatization may be a big thing. The macroeconomics of privatization, the repercussion in the labor market, the valuation of an asset, the valuation how you do, there are a lot of questions that's there related to the privatization. So it takes time. So disinvestment secretary, when I was listening to him in the press meeting after the budget, so he mentioned that we may not be showing it in the budget, but the process is on, and we have to tackle many things before we get that fiscal proceeds on board. Okay, well taken, that point. So that's a story about the taxation side. Now, expenditure side, as I mentioned earlier, revenue spending a little bit of cut there, but capex is given important. So that's a story about the revenue spending, and the whole thing, the budget is not a technical exercise. There is a political economy to it. So the students, when you grow up, when you look into the budget, it is not only an annual financial statements. You have to think, what's a political economy question behind this? What is a political economy right now in front of us? A few states are going for elections, right? Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Uttarakhand, Manipur, and Goa. So you have to look into this budgetary announcements, whether she is using this budget to signal certain kind of a incentive for, we call it as calculus of consent. means when you vote, you have to give that consent to the government, no? So that calculus can be, incentivized or can be influenced by the budgetary announcements also. There is a political economy to it. But do you remember a single announcement this year to incentivize the calculus of voting or calculus of consent, that announcements to the states like UP or Manipur or Uttarakhand or Goa? I haven't seen a single announcement this time. So this is, though we are going for elections, that finance minister has not used the budget as an election budget. She has not announced any populist measures. Populist measures in the sense, one can be incentivizing the voters' consent. Second can be the narrative that one is like government can go for a huge economic stimulus program by providing cash into the hands of people. We call it as universal basic income, right? 2 years back, if you look at the economic survey, 2 or 3 years back, when Arvind Subramaniam was our chief economic advisor, it was his pet project. Like, he believed in universal basic income, that guarantee to the people who are suffering in the lower rung of the society, that low end of the pyramid. But Indian government has not gone for designing cash transfers to the hands of people. Why? Because their assumption was that it may not trigger the demand in the economy if the propensity of the people to use that money, to propensity to save, is higher than the propensity to spend. So they haven't floated such kind of cash transfers program or basic income program. And you can also take a look into the discussions among yourselves. You can argue about this, and a set of students can think that employer of last resort, when everything else fail, government has to guarantee employment to the people. Whether that policy narrative is better or other narrative is basic income, not participation income. Participation means the people have to participate in the economy, economic activity, and earn an income. But basic income, you don't have to do anything. If there is a livelihood crisis, then government will support you in terms of cash transfers. That is basic income. So in that narrative, I think our government gave emphasis to employer of last resort policies, that is job guarantee policies. At the same time, I have to confess that there is a reduction in job guarantee schemes, that NREGA allocation came down. But you can see that today or tomorrow, government has to provide that money to the people. Maybe the temporary mismatch due to the lack of jobs or anything, because it's a basically a right to work. That is NREGA. It's a right to work, the guaranteeing right to work to the people. So maybe it's a temporary decline in the allocation, but that has to be given to the people in the long term. So maybe that's a way I'm thinking, that this temporary mismatch between BE and RE, that story is only transient. That's my hope. Let's wait for the next numbers, then we will be able to understand that better. Now comes the question of economic stimulus packages. As I mentioned earlier, there were packages for instantaneous firefighting, and they also focused on human development related spending, like food security, that is very crucial in the time of pandemic. And they focused on social infrastructure. What are the important measures? Social infrastructure is education. You have a digital divide, and the students who have access to system, access to internet, they are here. And if you look at that number, the students who have access to the internet and access to system, it's maybe 20%. So you can see that how many students are now away from studies. So this is the a real cost of the pandemic, because we did a lockdown, we did the online education, but the students are out of school, and we need to look into that digital divide very carefully. And in this budget, there were some announcements related to the digital divide. But these announcements were related to having TV stations, having digital universities, and of course the technology, that 5G spectrum, all these artificial intelligence, everything is announced. But from the demand side, how you're going to support a child, a student who does not have access to system or internet, that policy from the demand side, that, how you're going to tackle that digital divide, I think more policies needs to be on board. And I couldn't find any announcements related to digital divide from the demand side, from the student side, how you are supporting a student for, to continue his or her education. So that's a gap. Now, health sector, of course, vaccination is very important because that's scientific temper. And our nation, we have not shown any vaccine aversion there, because we all have scientific temper, because if it is going to protect us, if the impact of the COVID, even if we get COVID, but if the symptoms are going to be milder, if we are vaccinated, then go for it. That scientific temper we have shown, the first shot and the second shot, with the Covishield or Covaxin, we're going ahead with the decision that we are going to be vaccinated, and it is helping ourselves, and also we are, helping our society by, taking that decision quickly that we will go for vaccination. And that is very crucial. And that kind of decision in the health sector is very important, and the preparedness to face a health crisis. And I hope that this epidemiology of the virus, that we will not have one more story about a, another variant or anything, God forbid. But if that is there, that will lead to quick revisions in our growth recovery process. That's very crucial. And as students, you must understand that maybe you can take a look into Geeta Gopinath's work. She's very popular among students. I know she's from IMF, and she lived in Karnataka in her childhood, and I think her early education was in Karnataka. And Geeta Gopinath's paper, cycle is strength, you have to take a look into that. Like business cycles you study in the class, right? There are ups and downs in the growth process. So this business cycles may not be strictly, that cycles may not be there in the context of emerging economy. In the sense, is down, a drop from the earlier part of GDP, that drop may not be temporary. That can be a permanent scar if in the time of crisis and the pandemic, if we don't look into the structural bottlenecks. That could be a permanent scar. So what could be the policies to tackle that structural? That's what I mentioned earlier also. And in this budget, we have seen, that structural reforms as well, that power sector related reforms announcement, all these are structural in nature. So we need to look into the both components, cyclicality and the structural issues when we talk about the growth process. And you must have seen the GDP numbers. And of course, it is 9.2%. But if you look closely, the GDP is profit driven. If it is profit driven, then you have to ask a hard question. India is growing for whom? It's growing for the millionaires. There is a financial exuberance in the stock market, but when you look at the real economy, there is a crisis. Small firms, the people belonging to the small income households, they are not doing well. So what could be that policies to support uneven recovery? It's not V-shaped for everyone. It's not V-shaped recovery for all the segments of population. So you need to look into the policy measures. And I think there are budgetary announcements related to, the kind of support, hand-holding to be given to the lower income households, and that, small business firms, that we couldn't find much. That is very crucial. So the story in nutshell is fiscal consolidation on one side and growth process on other side. Fiscal discipline, if you go for too much consolidation by keeping the fiscal deficit so strictly at 3%, that can affect your growth recovery process. So you should not be doing that. That's why, from a position of strength, minister announced a deficit which is like not 3%, but 6.4% for the next year. That is what she pegged. And right now we have 6.9. Of course, it has come down from last year's 9.2 or 9.5% of GDP deficit. That was huge, but that is also a transparency process. Like there are many elements which are not reflected in the fiscal deficit, but that is a deficit. For instance, the borrowing that happened through the public sector entities may not be appear in the concept of fiscal deficit. So last year she to make it transparent, she has incorporated certain components of the off-budget borrowings also into the fiscal deficit to show that the numbers went up, but that is making it more transparent. So that's very important to look into. So consolidation path is medium term, in the sense we will go back to 4.5 by 2025-26. So that roadmap is set, that communication is well, that is articulated well to the investors to gain investors' confidence. So that is clearly mentioned that by 2026, we will reach 4.5% of deficit. Right now, we cannot curtail deficit because it will affect growth recovery process. So we need to, wait to get the deficit back to that, the prior pandemic levels or the 3% or anything. Now, I have to tell you a story about RBI as well, because there is a fiscal policy, monetary policy coordination you need to understand when we talk about budget process. In the sense, you must have heard about the taper tantrums, right? Taper tantrums in the sense, after the global financial crisis, there was too much liquidity in the system. And right now, what US Federal Reserve, that's their central bank, is planning is to decrease the size of their balance sheet by absorbing that excess liquidity. In the process, their interest rate, US Federal Reserve's interest rate may go up. Jay Powell, who is the chair of, like our governor, who is the chair of the US Central Bank, he already communicated that he may increase his interest rates. So can you think of some repercussions in emerging economies like India if US Fed increase the interest rate? If you look at the foreign exchange, if you look at the foreign capital, there are two components to it, right? One is your FDI, which is more stable. That's the multinational companies that stake the foreign capital stake in the companies. That's a very stable one, FDI. FII, foreign institutional investment, there is a component called portfolio investment. There, hot money is there. And hot money, by definition, is the money which responds to high interest rates. So the hot money will be flighty. The capital flight will happen the moment they increase their interest rate. Now you can see the dilemma, right? Policy certainty is very crucial, but RBI will have a MPC meeting on February 9th. You must read those minutes in the RBI website. The Monetary Policy Committee decisions, that minutes are given. You must take a look into that. And that's the space where you will understand about our interest rates, our decisions about inflation targeting. These are two important components, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, the important document is budget. We try to read that budget from the expenditure and side and revenue side, and also we read the numbers of the deficit. Okay, that process is done. Now, we have to co-read this with the RBI. That is fiscal policy and monetary policy coordination is very important. And the moment you look into the RBI dynamics, you understand that there is a pressure on RBI to increase the interest rates. If you remember, in March 2020 to May 2020, within that period, we reduced it to 4%. 4% is our repo rate. And repo rate means what? It's a rate of interest in which RBI lends money to the commercial banks. And we access commercial banks for some credit, and that is another interest rate. So that is through the monetary policy, the transmission mechanism. First is like RBI lending to the commercial banks, that rate is repo rate. Then commercial banks, when the repo rate is reduced, the commercial bank should correspondingly reduce their rates so that consumers will get benefit. That is a monetary policy transmission mechanism. So that happens with a delay. Now, what is reverse repo rate? Reverse repo rate means the commercial banks can park their money back with RBI, right? So that is reverse repo rate. So in the time of pandemic, we reduced that repo rate to 3.35% to nudge commercial banks to go for lending. And don't park your money here. You go ahead with your lending process. So we reduced that to give that monetary policy corridor is widened, like you're giving an accommodative monetary policy framework, giving importance to liquidity infusion into the system. Then what was another announcement in the bond market? You can think about you as a banker. that you have assets which are short-term in nature, long-term in nature, bonds. And what is the risk? If it is short-term, you have refinancing risk in the short term. So the RBI has done an operation twist in the manner like you simultaneously sell your short-term bonds and buy more long-term bonds. So the maturity structure of your bond market is long-term. You postpone your refinancing risk because we need money, we need space for economic growth recovery. So these are the ways in which RBI has gone ahead through the liquidity infusion into the economy. Then, of course, a lot of direct liquidity infusion in the hands of people through the small and medium term enterprises. They have supported them by credit infusion. So mainly through credit infusion and reduction in the rate of interest, RBI has done a heavy lifting to support the economy. But right now, RBI is under pressure to increase the interest rates because inflation is mounting. WPI inflation, that's a wholesale price in inflation, that is 14.1. It is like going like that. Our consumer price in inflation, that is what we all experience. Retail, that wholesale is for the wholesale. You don't take the things in wholesale, right? You are consumers. So consumer price index inflation is reaching around 6. And in India, new monetary policy framework, as per that, what you have to do, you have to maintain an inflation rate or up to 4%. That's a nominal anger. But if you are in a very crisis time, then you can go up to 6% or plus or minus 2. That's a band. If you look at the numbers, CPI inflation is reaching 6%. Your interest rate is 4%. Can you understand? The real interest rate is nominal interest rate minus inflation. That is 4 minus 6. It is negative. What is the repercussion of a negative interest rate in India? We have deposits in the bank. We have an interest rate for that. But if you take out the inflation content from that, you know, you are into a negative interest rate regime, means you're not even getting the money you deposited. That's a, we don't feel that because there is a monetary illusion, a fiscal illusion over there. But, the story is like that. Interest rates go negative. If the inflation is mounting, then your real interest rate go negative. And in the pension markets, if your parents are putting the pension money in the pension bond markets, and if there is a real rate of interest which is negative, means the parents are not even getting the money they have deposited. So these are areas of concern of mounting inflation. So should we go for a hawkish policy? What do you feel? What will be the announcement of RBI on February 9th? Will they increase the interest rate? Then there will be a huge tug of war between North Block, that is our Ministry of Finance, and RBI, because North Block, their feel is that interest rate should be lower. In the Raghuram Rajan, when he was governor, we see that we face this dilemma because he raised the interest rate, right? Then why North Block always wanted interest rate to be lower? Because that support growth recovery, because your credit will be cheaper. You can go for investment because interest rates are lower. But at the same time, financialization of savings are getting affected because your savings, what's the interest, that's getting affected. But if you ask me what could be that rate of interest which support both savings and this, there are some kind of literature which talks about equilibrium rate of interest and all, but you need to look into that. But officially in the new monetary policy framework, 4% is the in that inflation that you allowed in your economy with a plus or minus 2. So mounting inflation, of course, that is a mandate of RBI to control the inflation. So we have to wait and see to prevent capital flight in order to face this financialization of savings issue, to face this mounting inflation. Will RBI announce a kind of a small BPS rise in the 4 to 4.2 or 3 or something like that? Will they announce? We have to wait and see. So that's exactly what is a normalization procedure. So when you read the newspapers, you can see that the union budget has not declared anything for the normalization procedure. Means what? Whatever we announced as an economics pandemic packages or stimulus packages, government has not rolled back any of the announcements. In the sense, deficit was not announced as a strict 3% of GDP number. and she has not announced any pandemic packages which are floated in the economy, a sudden withdrawal from that. She's supporting the food security issues. So these are the ways in which there was no formal announcement of normalization. RBI also has not announced any formal normalization. Normalization means what? In March 2020 to May 2020, I mentioned to you that the process of reduction in the the repo rates to 4%. So normalization means you have to go back to little 4.2 or 4.3, something like that. But such kind of normalization procedure or going back to the prior pandemic, interest rates, that has not happened. Another normalization is sucking back that excess liquidity you infused into the system to support the pandemic-ridden economy. That is also not happening. But credit side economic stimulus has got its own limitations. That's why there is an important role for the fiscal policy and the budget to support the economy. And this budget has rightly done that, in the sense they supported the economy by keeping the deficit up or the debt up. But of course, we have issues of fiscal risk, but that will tackle in the long term, because we have a roadmap to bring it down by 2026. So roadmap is there, but an instantaneous reduction in the deficit will affect the growth recovery. So that's the entire narrative of the budget. So over to you, Dr. Vinoda, ma'am. Students have questions, then I will take up the questions. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Jomo.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. We are really indeed privileged to have heard from you. So thank you so much. Now the session is open for queries. If the participants have any questions, they can either unmute themselves or they can even post their queries in the chat box. Ma'am, there is a question in the chat box. May I read it out for you, ma'am?
Sure.
Ma'am, there is a question. Whether the budget for the financial year 2022-23 is possible to implement with emphasis on capital expenditure to support growth, credit positive for non-financial companies, financial institutions, but poses long-term fiscal challenges in India.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Who asked that question?
Dr. Mohammed Jahangir Ali, sir.
Jahangir Assis.
Jahangir Ali.
Teacher. Okay, he's a teacher.
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay, good. I'll answer. So I was thinking that we already reaching 4, so I will take all the questions and then respond it together. What do you say? Go ahead with questions. You read questions for me. I'm noting it down. Then I will respond it at the end.
Ma'am, it's okay, ma'am. You can give the answer to this question. When the other question pops up, I'll ask that question after your response. It's fine, ma'am. You can answer this one.
Okay. Then let me go ahead with, thank you so much for that question, Dr. Jahangir. Emphasis on the capital to support growth is welcome. That's what, I mentioned. And the real challenge is, in the work of Stiglitz and Rashid, their paper, the title is Which Economic Stimulus Works? That's posted in the Project Syndicate. You know about that blog, right? So when I read that, he clearly mentioned about the Nobel laureate Stiglitz, he clearly mentioned about the limited multiplier effects of credit side economic stimulus packages. And that's exactly what we are seeing in India right now. The credit side or the credit infusion related economic stimulus programs, because the access was uneven. Due to the fear of people that how they will repay if there is no economic activity and if there is no demand side, demand stimulation, if there is no demand for their products. So there are a lot of confusion related to who access the credit, one. Two, whether they have taken any personal loans at even high rate of interest to pay back their credit, which they have taken because economic activity didn't go up and they didn't have that demand side, we don't have much policies to stimulate the demand, right? So this kind of Ponzi finance in the sense, you have a debt, but you take another debt at very high rate of interest to repay your first debt. So such kind of things are happening, whether households or the small business firms are in perpetual debt. But I think our high frequency data giving indications that the debt is going up. So these are concerns related to the credit side policies. But of course, as you mentioned correctly, that through to the NBFCs and all, we are supporting, the government and the RBI. They are doing heavy lifting to support, the small and medium term, and their credit offtake is now high. But we have to see the long term trend. But my limited point is the monetary policy side economic stimulus package may have limitations through the credit infusion methods, because that can lead to uneven recovery if the demand side is not supported. So that's my limited take on your question. Thanks for that.
Thank you, ma'am. There is another question. Is it the right decision to increase deficit when inflation is high? Won't it depress the economy with higher inflation?
Oh, good question. Deficit is not inflationary here, but you can tell me what are the determinants of inflation this moment. Let's take a look. It's because of supply chain disruptions. It's because of the volatility in oil prices, and it is because of the volatility in energy prices and the food prices. So that is supply side. Demand, there is no demand. So when you increase your deficit, instead of inflation, it will increase your output. That's what I believe. That's a macroeconomic school of thought, that deficit is not inflationary this moment, but the inflation you experience right now, that's mainly through the supply chain disruptions and the volatility in energy and food prices, which we need to tackle. Because high expansionary fiscal policy this moment will increase the output, because we are doing it through the capex, capital spending. So that's my take on this. And you can call with me, you have a counterpoint on that. And this question was asked by Prarthana. Who asked me that question of inflation? Abhilash.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. That was a question from Vinoda, ma'am.
Okay. Oh, you also asked me through chat. You didn't talk to me, huh? Okay. Okay, that's a standard pattern that you will put the questions in chat box, all of you. That's wonderful. And if somebody wants to talk to me, you can switch on the microphone, and it's okay for me. And go ahead, you can talk to me about the chat box. Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. And as ma'am said, if anyone wants to unmute themselves, they can unmute. And if you're comfortable with typing in your questions in the chat box, that's also fine. Ma'am, there is another question. In the budget, the finance minister introduced the digital rupee. How this will affect the economic cash flow system of the country? How exactly is it? Does it differ from the cryptocurrency? And also, how does it affect the macroeconomic parameters such as inflation?
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Prarthana, for that question. It's brilliant. Digital currency is something which is provided by central bank. That's why it's currency. Crypto, in that sense, it's not a currency, but it's an asset. So that difference, is there. And your take on a digital currency, I think you are very uncomfortable, because that could lead to many macroeconomic issues like inflation and all. What's the monetary policy's role to play over here? Here, my hunch is they have to first put a regulatory framework to this announcement, because regulatory framework is very important. Otherwise, when you do the cross-border transactions and all, that could lead to a lot of issues. I'm not talking about funding, financing terrorism or anything, because it's kind of a invisible, trading can happen over here. But regulatory framework is very important. And, the article which I enjoyed most on the digital currency is by Baron Aiken Green. I can give that paper to Vinoda ma'am. he talks about digital currency. You have to take a look into that. Even Janet Ellen's take on this digital currency is there. I was quite surprised that she was supporting the digital currency, because she's telling that it could be a wonderful medium of exchange, because as a part of her pandemic package announcements, lot of cash transfers and the huge macro fiscal stimulus she has announced. And she's thinking that this kind of, transferring the money into the hands of people, the digital currency can ease the process. Like, it can reduce a lot of transaction cost. And she was supporting it from a financial inclusion perspective. And it was eye-opener for me. Like, I was thinking about the negative things of this asset, like it could lead to a lot of issues in the cross-border transactions. It can lead to a lot of, not tax evasion. Right now, they have announced that it is taxable. A lot of, kind of money laundering. They may, park that money, that assets in a wallet abroad, and they will monetize it by going abroad. So those kind of regulatory framework which prevent these kind of, things from happening, that's very important. Once that is done, then through the monetary and fiscal policy, that coordination is very crucial, that how this is going to work. And over the years, we are very comfortable in the way in which that concept of money is developed intertemporally. Intertemporally means over time. The first time, if you remember, then, how you finance the war, like you have to go with a bag full of gold coins. That was the medium of exchange. Then from there, you started minting coins. Then you get into the currency. So there is a beautiful evolution of money and currency over the years. So this is also adding to that. So you have to take from a positive side about the digital currency. And also people ask that it is a decentralized finance when you talk about crypto. But the moment you talk about the central bank digital currency, it's not a decentralized finance. The things are centralized. That is more what do you call the authentic. That's why we believe in central bank CBDC than crypto. But I understand that the moment finance minister announced that the crypto is taxed, I don't know how should I take this narrative. That means she indirectly accepting it as an authentic form of transaction. She's making it legal, that crypto, because once it is taxable. So these questions are there, and we are debating about this, and we need to wait for that bill to come about this crypto to get clarity on this subject. But I'm very positive. With open mind, I'm looking into these developments, because in the time of pandemic and all, we understand the kind of entrepreneurial that spirit, how we need to support them. For entrepreneurs, if this digital currency is going to ease their transactions, if suppose you want to sell your painting or any assets in abroad, so as an entrepreneur, things should support you to do that in a smooth manner, whether this this currency will be able to support you for a smooth transaction. So if that is positive, then support that. And like Janet Ellen mentioned, if it helps in financial inclusion also, that was a point I was taken aback, the way she mentioned about financial inclusion and digital currency. So this is an upcoming topic. We need to read more on this. And this paper I mentioned, I will forward to Dr. Vinodini ma'am, and Vinodha ma'am, and she can send it across to all of you. So right now, I don't want to venture into talking anything very because these are all the subjects which are evolving, and let's wait and see how things shape up. And it's a very positive decision. I own this decision of finance ministry to go ahead with a digital currency, and we have to wait for that. We have to wait for the name of the currency, if at all it's there. We have to wait for the bill. All these things we need to wait. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. So before I move on to the last question, I would like to remind the participants that the feedback link form has already been shared in the chat box. Please do kindly fill the feedback form. So, ma'am, I would ask one last question. So, as you said, I also think that legalizing digital currency or digital the asset is good, and I believe you are also in favor of having promoting crypto also. But what's your take on the 30% tax on crypto and digital assets?
uh, okay. Um, uh, can I not answer that? Because I don't have any clear answer for that, because I thought that the regulatory framework is quite crucial, and this decision needs to be sequential to that. But finance minister was very she did it in a very fast manner, and it was asked to her in the press conference after the budget. But the way she answered is that if something is happening, some transaction is happening, and if it is giving you a handful of money, then I can tax it even before going ahead with the regulatory process. That's the way she answered in the press conference. This is what finance minister has answered. But I need to look into this in detail, because I, frankly speaking, I'm not convinced about the taxation of this what do you call, the digital currency, prior to the regulatory framework and prior to the bill that is announced and all. That kind of a divergence, or kind of um, what do you call, I'm not convinced. So I need time to understand this decision. But of course, with an open mind, I accept that. But regarding tax, I'm not convinced. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I think Mohammed sir wants to ask one more question. Sir, if you want, you can unmute yourself, sir, or you can also type in your question in the chat box.
Good afternoon, madam.
Yeah.
Lekha, madam. So I am Dr. Muhammad Jahangir Ali from Oman. I am associate professor in Al-Buraymi University College. Basically, I am from Usmania University from Telangana. I am a academic dean also. So what is the role of present budget about the new education policy in India?
Thank you. As I mentioned, regarding that increasing the allocation to a threshold level of GDP, like even 6%, that's what we always anticipated. So that has not happened. All what was announced, that limited announcements were related to, tackling the digital divide. And as I mentioned earlier in the lecture also, they announced about bridging the digital divide through setting up of 200 TV stations, digital universities. So such kind of announcements were there. But I think to support the new education policy and to support the education sector, these are not complete announcements. And I also have concerns like you that the education sector was not given adequate importance. And also, the economists are divided regarding the strategy of children learning online, or the schools should be opened fast so that the children can come back to the school and having the learning process offline. So open the schools, that's a way, one kind of campaigning is going on, that you have to open schools faster. I do completely agree with your point that we have not given adequate emphasis to the education sector in this budget to support the new education policy altogether. And we have not increased allocation to that 6% of GDP or anything. One thing I want to tell you, that's my final point regarding your take on education, that's about the size of the government. So you can take a look into the size of the government, like expenditure to GDP across countries and public expenditure on education to GDP. So is there any correlation, or like the countries in which the size of government is high, then they are spending on education also a little bit more than the countries where the size of government is less? No, there is no correlation. It's about priority. because there are many countries where the size of government, that is expenditure, total expenditure to GDP may be lower than our country, but their allocation in education to GDP may be higher. So that's all about the prioritization, that what's your priority. So in that sense, I think whether it is health, public expenditure on health, whether it is public expenditure on education, total, like your social infrastructure investment, I think we need to do more work there. And, things are partial. I do share your concern. We don't have any significant announcements related to social infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, that support was to capital, physical infrastructure. But of course, social infrastructure is very crucial for a sustainable development process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for details reply. Thank you very much, madam, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lekha. This is Dr. Pratna. I'm an assistant professor with the Indraprastha University Department of Economics. Thank you so much for this enriching lecture, and it was indeed a pleasure listening to you. Just one last question I have is, since gender budgeting is your area of specialization, and during the pandemic, what we have seen is that women have been most affected either in terms of loss of employment or let's say domestic violence and other aspects. So how do you relate? Do you see any evidence from the budget towards gender budgeting specific to the female section of the society?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Prarthana. When economic stimulus packages are short-run in nature, this public financial management tools like gender budgeting should be given importance in the post-pandemic public financial strategies. So your point is well taken that as a PFM tool, gender budgeting needs to be given importance. Now let's look into the reality. This budget, not even once she mentioned that in the budget speech, about women or about gender this time. That was quite surprising. Now let's look into the detailed demand for grants, because they have uploaded all the documents, may not be there in the budget speech, but they have uploaded the documents, expenditure. There are 2 expenditure budgets, and children can take a look into those documents. So in the expenditure budget volume 1, there is a statement, I think the number is 13, I think there is a statement on gender budget. I had a quick look into that, but allocation has slightly come down. That gender budgeting statement that looks into the intensity of gender into the budgetary allocations. You are applying a gender lens to the budget. That is that application of gender lens is very crucial, and you identify the intensity of gender in the allocation. I think Prarthana knows that area quite well. And when we look into the sector wise, the only 2 announcements that has happened as a part of Atmanirbhar package to tackle the pandemic related gender issues were, one was announcing gender budgeting in energy infrastructure, that is supporting women with good fuel, fuel, clean fuel, the low income households. That is welcome. Of course, that announcement in the Department of Petroleum happened prior to the pandemic, but in the Atmanirbhar package, that was given importance, that you strengthen that policy in the time of pandemic. That's welcome, because if you look into the statistics, the women and children, they having respiratory problems related to the indoor air pollution by cooking using the non-clean fuels and all, in that poorly ventilated houses in the village, that can lead to a lot of respiratory related morbidity and mortality. And if you look into the statistics, then people dying out of, that indoor air pollution related respiratory problems are higher than the people dying out of even malaria. So you need to look into these aspects, and providing clean fuel is quite important. That's welcome. But in this budget, in gender budget, you can just Google it and tell me that you have not seen that program in the recent budget statement, gender budget. There is no allocations reported from the Petroleum Ministry, and there is no Ujjwala, they call it as Ujjwala, no, this program like giving subsidies, LPG to the poor households. I haven't seen that in the gender budget. So whether they have rolled back this program altogether, and I also got, I need to confirm that news, by September 2020, they stopped it. And you also can understand from the people around you that they must be telling you that we are no longer getting that subsidy or that support from the government. So then this is one of the announcements which I felt that the gender budgeting in energy sector was quite crucial. So rolling back, that's an area of concern. Second, as you mentioned about the domestic violence, of course, gender budgeting has got an important role to play in upholding the social justice of women. It's a tool for social justice. I accept that. And there's a study by University of California. They looked into it through an econometric exercise, and in that they found that gender budgeting leads to low, violence against women. That inverse relationship. Why so? Because the state machinery supporting women will lead to decrease in the violence against women. So that gender budgeting can be used as a framework to support the social justice. That's quite crucial. Then look into the education and health. There's a paper by Stotsky. Then Stotsky is an IMF economist, Janet Stotsky. They also looked into the data in the context of India at the subnational government levels and identified that gender budgeting has got a positive role to play in terms of decreasing the disparity between boys and girls in educational outcomes. All these things are fine, but we find that gender budgeting has not, no significant or insignificant impact on labor markets. Why so? Because we are focusing our policies, because if the fastest and smartest way to develop is through increasing the women's labor force participation, that secret we need to understand. I think our prime minister will be able to understand that secret, that the fastest and smartest way to develop India is increase the labor force participation of women. Such pool of insights and talents, you please take them on board. Then what could be that announcements relate to that? Care economy related infrastructure announcements. So infrastructure means, as I said to Dr. Muhammad, it's also social infrastructure. Now I'm telling you, it's also care economy infrastructure. So that comprehensive care economy policy is very crucial. And I do believe that outside the purview of budget, in order to address this uneven recovery process, we may be, giving certain kind of an announcements like another tranche to tackle this uneven recovery by announcing the public financial management tools like gender budgeting, because that's the promising framework to tackle the issues related to the shadow pandemic. Shadow pandemic is what they call this, in the pandemic time, domestic violence against women has gone from the intimate partner. And there are studies which show that macroeconomic cost of this intimate partner violence, there are issues related to that. And gender budgeting, as you said correctly, it is rightly said that it's a very promising public financial management tool. I hope that it will get its due attention in the post-pandemic fiscal policy strategies. Prarthana? Muted, I couldn't hear.
I think ma'am is not able to unmute
Yeah,
it.
okay.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
sorry. Yeah.
I'm able to, I hope I'm audible now. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Dr. Lekha. It has been so wonderful listening to you. And I completely agree with all the points. And I think because you are sitting in the right, at the right place and your voice is being heard. So I think most of the women, they also work in the unorganized sector. And
Correct.
probably we need to somehow bring them in a framework where we could bring them in an organized place where they get the due respect and the due wages for their work. So I think that is also another thing that needs to be taken up.
Absolutely, well taken. The gender parity in wages, that's a matter of concern. and bring them to the formal from the informal sector. Yeah, these are very crucial. Informal sector, suffered like anything during the pandemic, and we didn't have the data, and people were using, nightlight intensity data to capture the problems related to the informal sector. Geeta Gopinath's one work is there after the demonetization. Then recently, another scholar from IIM Ahmedabad has done the impact of COVID in the informal sector using the nightlight intensity. We don't have data on economic growth when we talk about the informal sector. So how to capture the economic growth in informal sector? So they use this as satellite data, like look into the nightlight intensity and studied about that, right? Yeah, so data building is also very crucial. Yeah, it's a tough time, extraordinary times. If we think that how we have managed that mental health issues, I think in the budget it is given right priority, that mental health issues, because children, they are doing the online education, how it is affecting their mind, all those things are very relevant, and how they cope up, the coping up mechanisms, and this kind of support is also very crucial the moment we talk about health. It's not only physical health, but it's also about your mental health. So I do give my full heart and love to each one of you, the students out there, that you braved it. You tackled this crisis so brave, and I hope that your aspirations and prayers will meet, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for answering our questions. And also thank you to other teachers who asked such brilliant questions also. So thank you. It was indeed a very informative session. Once again, I would like to remind the participants that the feedback form link has been shared in the chat box. Please do kindly fill the feedback form.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jo.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Moving on.
Will, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I will
sure,
talk
sure,
to.
ma'am.
Yeah, I will talk to Dr. Vinoda, ma'am, later. So let me leave them. Okay. All the best to the students and the faculty members, and thank you so much once again to Dr. Vinod Devi for having me for this wonderful session. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's really a valuable session for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on. Thank you is the best prayer that anyone could say. It expresses extreme gratitude, humility, and understanding. I invite Ms. Kristu Johnson of third year BA EPS to propose the vote of thanks.
Thankfulness is the beginning of gratitude, and gratitude is the completion of thankfulness. A very good evening to one and all present here. As we come to the close of the Budget Lecture Series 3, the Macroeconomic Framework of Union Budget, I deem it a great privilege and honor to propose the vote of thanks. On this day, where we experienced an unmatched insightfulness and profound delicacy, I thank Almighty for giving us such an erudite experience. I'm extremely privileged to thank our chief guest of the day, Dr. Lekha S. Chakrabarti, Professor, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi. Once again, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for leading us through such an enriching session on the implications of Budget 2022. We are indeed humbled by your esteemed presence, ma'am. Now, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Reverend Father Dr. Augustine George, Principal, Kristu Jayanti College, for being a constant beacon of light and putting in the best efforts to provide us with ample and most conducive learning environment. Thank you, Father. I would also like to thank Reverend Father Lijopi Thomas, Financial Administrator, Kristu Jayanti College, Reverend Father Emmanuel PJ, Director, Kristu Jayanti College of Law, Reverend Father Joshi Matthew, and Reverend Father Deepu Joy, and the other management team for constantly mentoring us and molding us by excellence. I would also like to thank Dr. Aloysius Edward, Dean of Commerce and Management, for taking the lead and organizing this event. I would also like to thank Dr. K. Vinoda Devi, Head Department of Economics, for her unwavering support, guidance, and encouragement at all the point of time. I would also like to thank Professor Tinto Tom, Faculty Coordinator for the event, and all the faculty members and students for their cooperation in making this event possible. Also, my heartfelt gratitude to technical team who have been paying attention to specific details. Once again, I take immense pleasure in extending an earnest thanks to each and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristi. The session has now come to a close. The host can now end the meeting. Thank you all once again.